once again. My name is Max. I won't take a lot of time, so 15 minutes, quite quick. So I'll be talking about using Bitcoin as a currency and as an escrow for real estate purchase. Actually, I think it's perfect timing after the last presentation that Gunther did. Before I will move on, I think it's really important to explain why Bitcoin was invented, which will give you an idea of why you might want to use it for buying or selling real estate. So for many people, the pain of using banks starts when they needed to complete transaction between different countries. For example, you can try sending 100 euros through the banking system to a person outside of European Union, and you quickly see how expensive and inefficient the process is. So in modern world, we have capital controls, we have KYC ML policies which are required by regulators and enforced by the financial system. And while they are claimed to be a noble measures to fight illegal activities, the reality is that they put a substantial price on many innocent transactions. Some people believed that the modern financial system is outdated and in many ways a rent-seeking monopoly taking advantage of regular people. Some of those people have turned to be engineers with a good grasp of cryptography, history, and economics. And so they, or most likely one person, invented Bitcoin. In short, the people who invented Bitcoin and initially used it all had a very simple idea in mind: monetary sovereignty. That is, they disliked the idea of states issuing and controlling money. So let me just remind you of Bitcoin's most important properties that influences its use cases. So all transactions that are made in Bitcoin blockchain are actually final. You can't reverse transaction. That's my favorite one. No bank or any other institution can decide which transaction can be allowed to happen or which cannot be allowed to happen. Bitcoin is scarce. You cannot print out more than it will be initially, and initially it will be 21 million Bitcoin by the year 2141. It's permissionless. No one can censor the transaction. No one can tell you what to do or what not to do. And it's basically peer-to-peer crypto, so you don't need a middleman to make a transaction. So there's a buzzword out there. It's called blockchain, which many like to use instead of Bitcoin to avoid controversy. Unfortunately, a lot of people using the word have no idea what it actually means. Well, a blockchain is basically a chain of cryptographically verified transaction data such that each new block of transaction is based upon the previous block. So not to go too much into boring technical details, but the Bitcoin's blockchain is public. Anyone can see all transactions on it. It works and is secure actually only because there's a currency integrated into that miners can mine. So without it, no one would have an interest to secure the transactions on the blockchain. And private blockchain, mostly, that many banks are proposing completely miss the point. The Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain works and is valued because there's no bank that controls it. So I've been speaking already in my previous presentation on the market stance of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, so I will just skip it, and of the purchasing power of people holding Bitcoin at the moment. So now it would be actually a good time to ask why Bitcoin is good for buying and selling real estate. Well, a lot of people in Bitcoin were always focused on consumer payments, buying airline tickets, booking hotels, or even coffee. People who are familiar with the guy named Roger Ver know that there's a debate about buying a coffee with Bitcoin at the moment. But over time it became obvious that sustaining a huge sector of consumer payments is not viable, as there's a limited block space and only a certain number of transactions per minute can be done with Bitcoin blockchain. However, the more important large volume transactions are still viable and will actually be the first layer of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain itself, is good at. Real estate purchases fall into this category almost too perfectly. Here are important points to consider. So there's demand on both sides. People who have a lot of Bitcoin want to buy real estate, either for living or as the way of diversifying their portfolio. People who want to buy Bitcoin want to do it fast and without an additional hassle of going through the banks. Because transactions are uncensorable, institution cannot block anyone from buying or selling real estate. With less intermediaries involved, it's possible to cut commissions and processing times. Purchasing real estate with Bitcoin is still completely legal and recognized by most countries. That slide was already there about a part of the real estate deals that's happening for crypto. So, as you saw from the previous slides, and we were discussing it today, they're already happening crypto to real estate deals, but the methods currently being used are risky and inefficient, to say at least. So when we met developers and sellers, we identified two methods that they're using. So they're either paying with Bitcoin without escrow directly to the seller, or they're paying with Bitcoin and converting it to fiat. So first method is quite simple, 3 steps. You sign an agreement with the seller, you transfer Bitcoin directly to the seller's wallet, and you wait for ownership rights registered on your name. So the second method is a bit more complicated, as you transfer Bitcoin not directly to the seller, you're transferring it to the middleman, payment processor or exchange. That middleman exchanges your Bitcoins to fiat and then deposits it to the seller bank account. And again, you wait for ownership rights. Sounds quite simple and easy, but the problem is that there's a lot of risks. So as I mentioned, all transactions are final in Bitcoin. So basically you can pay to anyone for real estate, and then this person might disappear with your money and without any transferring of ownership rights to you. Another thing is when you're converting Bitcoin to fiat, you're basically returning back to banks. People don't have any trust in the middleman. There's always a third-party risks with exchanges where you exchange Bitcoin to fiat because they get hacked initially. And everything that leads to the difficult execution. So traditional escrow, this is when a bank or some other entity that both parties locks your funds until a deal is made. It's also possible to have the same kind of traditional escrow with cryptocurrencies, and in fact it's been widely used on peer-to-peer exchanges like local bitcoins or Paxful. The problem is that these parties actually hold your bitcoins in their own wallet, which can be hacked, and in fact the probability of this party losing funds is actually orders of magnitude more than it was fiat money in a bank. But some cryptocurrency, namely Bitcoin and Litecoin, offer a different kind of escrow mechanism in which you can have multiple parties acting as escrow agents while not trusting a third party. Basically, it's a simple smart contract on a Bitcoin or Litecoin's blockchain. And it's also possible to release the coins from the escrow when all agents agree or when some agents agree to do so. So for example, you can have 2 out of 3 keys requirement, which means there are 3 escrow agents in total, and it's required to receive approval from 2 of any of those agents to release funds in any direction. So in simple terms, cryptocurrency escrow or a smart contract is an address on a blockchain from which funds can only be moved by entering multiple keys that belong to multiple parties. Now let's apply this mechanism to real estate purchases. In a typical real estate contract, you have a seller, you have a buyer, and lawyers or another mediator like bank. Imagine that the seller and buyer agreed on terms and signed a purchase agreement. Now here comes the blockchain-based part. Suppose the buyer locks the Bitcoin in escrow with a requirement that 2 out of 3 keys are required to unlock those Bitcoins. In this case, 1 key would belong to buyer, 1 key would belong to seller, and 1 key would belong to mediator. If everything goes well, the mediator isn't involved and both buyer and seller will sign a release transaction in favor of the seller as soon as the ownership rights for real estates are transferred. However, if something goes wrong, the mediator gets involved and may side with either a seller or a buyer and move Bitcoins in one or in another direction. You can actually have as many escrow agents as if you want. It can be like 10 signatures and 4 out of 10 sign the release transaction. This kind of mechanism is very flexible, and it's also drastically reduced costs as everything is done programmatically, and all you need is basically the digital signatures. There are no banks or other institutions involved. Now this was the slide about our project, but I already told you about it, so I will skip it. And we'll go to the last one. So why you can use and why would you use cryptocurrency escrow instead of traditional escrow? Well, just about 6 months ago, when the price of Bitcoin skyrocketed to 20,000, we literally saw people wanting to sell their real estate as soon as possible to purchase Bitcoin. This took actually a few months to sell their house, convert it to fiat, and then convert fiat to via exchange to cryptocurrency, which led many of them frustrated, especially seeing the prices of Bitcoin at the moment. On the other hand, there were a lot of newly rich Bitcoiners or crypto investors who wanted to purchase real estate while bypassing slow banks and dangerous Bitcoin exchanges. So there was demand for a service that would allow buying and selling real estate on both sides. Also, difficulties have always existed with the intermediate bank. We have a lot of requests from European and Middle East property developers that are struggling with buyers from abroad. Why? Because a lot of wealthy buyers are from Asia and Eastern Europe, and most intermediary banks refuse to process larger transactions from these clients, or they do it quite slowly. People are willing to buy and sell real estate using Bitcoin. There aren't a lot of these people, but our prediction is that there will be more. Thank you very much. Your questions.